There is a lesson that sometimes arrives quietly and then stays for a lifetime, not because it was dramatic, but because it was precise. Years ago, in a dojo located outside of Houston, I listened to an Aikido teacher explain something that at the time felt simple. Yet, this lesson would later shape how I moved through conflict, emotion, and uncertainty. He spoke about the importance of the initial reaction. And he explained that every pure martial art is defined not by the complexity of its techniques, but by what happens first, the movement that arises before thought, before strategy, before deliberation. For example, in karate, it may be a block and a counter punch. In judo, it's a sidestep and then a grapple. In Aikido, it is to step off the line of force, blend and redirect the energy. And when practitioners attempt to master many arts simultaneously, this approach called cross-training makes the nervous system learn to hesitate because it does not know which initial reaction to embody. And so, when you're under pressure, hesitation becomes vulnerability, while clarity of the first movement is actually coherence. Learning this teaching lesson slowly revealed itself beyond martial arts and into my daily life, because every human being lives inside initial reactivity. This is how we respond when we're criticized, when afraid, when uncertain, when memories surfaces, when life does not unfold according to our preferences. Many of us may spend years refining these secondary reactions through explanations or coping strategies or narratives that we tell ourselves. But rarely do we actually examine the first movement of consciousness itself. And for me, this examination unfolded through my own lived experience, especially during periods in my life where pushing forward, defending, explaining, and efforting produced little relief. Now, there came a recognition that some circumstances cannot be resolved through force of will, and that truth and timing and clarity often emerge through processes larger than personal control. Gradually, a different initial reaction appeared. It is stepping back. It's not withdrawal, not avoidance, but a subtle movement into space, a pause that allowed sensation and emotion and circumstance to exist without immediate interpretation. This step back became less a strategy and more a form of coherence. It became an embodied trust that life continues to unfold without the need for constant intervention. In this way, the lesson of developing an initial reaction converges with contemplative traditions, especially those that emphasize awareness prior to reactivity, and with Aikido's principle of stepping off the line of attack, and with the recognition that presence itself can be the primary movement of response. Mastering the initial reaction does not mean eliminating feeling or urgency or engagement, but instead it means refining what happens first so that subsequent actions emerge from clarity rather than blind compulsion. And it is the difference between reacting and responding, between grasping and allowing, between control and participation. And this mastery is not achieved through conceptual understanding alone, but it comes through repetition in ordinary moments, such as pausing when you feel overwhelmed, or softening when you are being criticized, breathing when uncertainty appears, trusting the unfolding when outcomes are remaining unresolved. Over time, the initial reaction becomes less something we remember to do and more something we naturally are. It is a return to spacious awareness, one that precedes interpretation. And perhaps this is what it means to live an unfettered life, not as the absence of challenge or delay or complexity, but actually the presence of a stable first movement toward spacious awareness. Whenever life touches us, we learn not to contract immediately into narrative, but instead to expand slightly into simple, relaxed noticing. And from that noticing, action may still occur, decisions may still be made, boundaries may still need to be established. But here's the difference. They arise from coherence rather than urgency. The invitation then is gentle. Observe your own initial reaction, not in idealized moments, but in real ones, when the message arrives, when the plan changes, when a painful memory surfaces, when longing appears. This is the time to pause and ask yourself quietly, what happens first? In that question lies a hidden doorway, because the art is not mastering life's circumstances, but mastering the space between stimulus and interpretation. And as this space becomes familiar, you will notice that something subtle changes. Your breath deepens. Your posture softens. Effort relaxes. And life is no longer experienced as a sequence of problems that need to be solved, but as a field of moments to meet. Mastering the initial reaction is therefore less a technique and more a return. It's a remembering that the first movement of freedom is awareness itself, to step back, to observe, to wait. What I've learned is that teaching often becomes clear not in dramatic moments, but in very ordinary ones. And today, something small happened that quietly illustrated everything I've been talking about here. I had gone to buy a few bananas. Now, my Social Security check hadn't arrived yet, so I had a pocket full of coins. It was quarters, half dollars, and I had one large dollar coin. I had carried it for years. It wasn't a collectible. It wasn't silver, just a solid piece of currency from another time. When I got to the self-checkout, I asked the young attendant if the machine would take coins. He walked over and shrugged and said, "I don't know. We'll find out." So I dropped the dollar coin into the slot. Nothing. Nothing happened. No sound, no rejection, no credit applied. My dollar coin simply vanished into the machine as if it had entered a place where it was no longer recognized. So the young guy called his manager, and after a couple of minutes, a young woman in a wheelchair came over and she began to carefully dismantle the mechanism piece by piece. She opened panel after panel and revealed compartments. She checked each one. Still no coin. Finally, deeper inside, we found it. It was lodged quietly where the system had no category for it. We laughed together as she retrieved it. And while she was working, I just sat nearby, calmly, amused. I peeled a banana and I ate it slowly. There was no irritation, no urgency. We just had a pleasant conversation. There was patience. There was an ease of exchange and a subtle sense of witnessing time layered inside a simple moment. It made me remember my grandfather. He used to carry a small change purse in his pocket. I remember when I would ride my bike to the store as a child, he would often come outside and hand me a 50-cent piece or a dollar coin from his hand. Coins were once exchanged directly between people. They were weighty, tactile, and personal. And so, standing in that modern checkout area, I realized the coin had not lost its value, but the system had simply changed. And I wondered how often this happens beyond currency, how parts of ourselves shaped in earlier times, earlier relationships, earlier ways of being, sometimes feel unrecognized by the structures we now move through. Yet, their value remains. What stayed with me most today was not the coin, but the posture of the moment. Patience instead of frustration, curiosity instead of complaint, connection instead of inconvenience. It was a small, ordinary scene, but it was one that became a quiet reminder to develop an initial reaction that is not urgent. Sometimes life places something familiar into a system that cannot immediately receive it. In those moments, we can resist, react, or hurry. Or we can just sit still, peel a banana, talk with the person beside us, and allow the moment to unfold like a holy encounter. The coin was found, the bananas were purchased, and I walked out carrying not just change in my pocket, but gratitude for having lived through many ways of exchanging value, hand to hand, coin to coin, moment to moment. And I left the store with bananas in hand and the coin returned to my pocket. And I realized that mastering the initial reaction is rarely proven in extraordinary moments, but quietly revealed in ordinary ones where patience, presence, and trust become the first movement of freedom.